Jim Harbaugh has headed out to Los Angeles. He's back in the NFL, Mel, with GM Joe Ortiz. Of course, you know him well from his time during the Baltimore Ravens. They are on the clock at pick number 5. Let's talk through the decision that they have to make, focusing in not just on the player that you had in your most recent mock draft, but also some other options that might be on the table.
You know what? It would have been fun field if they didn't have Justin Herbert. Luckily,
Sure.
they do have Justin Herbert, who Jim Harbaugh loves, right? But Jim Harbaugh is kind of going on record saying J.J. McCarthy, his guy at Michigan, could go number 1 in the draft. He's doing the mock drafts, Jim is. He said,
Come on, Jim.
What if they didn't have the quarterback? Would he go 5? We'll see. That would have been interesting to see. But they have Justin Herbert, so Jim Harbaugh doesn't have to worry about taking his quarterback, J.J. McCarthy. We'll see where he falls. And he may come up in our discussion today, field that name, J.J. McCarthy. But for the Chargers, they have their elite quarterback in Justin Herbert. Needs to get over the hump a bit. Yeah, he's been a quarterback that in the final 2-3 minutes of a game, when you need the field goal, you need the touchdown, doesn't get it done. So, again, that's when you really have to come through, and pieces around him have to be better as well, right? So you think about the offensive line. You think about another wide receiver in the mix. They've had a lot of injury issues at wide receiver. Who's a key guy, field, moving forward next year for the LA Chargers? It's going to be Quentin Johnston. Quentin Johnston is a guy coming out of TCU, had some drops, right? Consistency catching the football was the issue. We saw a little bit of that this year. Didn't have the impactful performances you really needed to have. You saw what Zay Flowers did. You saw what Addison did. It didn't get that with Johnston, right? See Jackson Smith and Jigba as well. You didn't get it with the 4th first-round receiver, which was Quentin Johnston overall. He had 4 receivers in round 1. 3 produced, 1 didn't. He needs to step up. He needs to be a key guy for the LA Chargers. If they get that field, then they could look to the O-line, right? Or they could look to the tight end position. Who's the best receiving entity in this draft outside of Marvin Harrison Jr.? I think it's Brock Bowers. So I'm on Brock Bowers. Another reason, field, tight end centric is Jim Harbaugh.
Sure.
With the Ravens, go through his career wherever he's been, right? Who was the number 1 go-to guy for J.J. McCarthy? It was Colston Loveland.
Yeah.
They brought in a lot of tight ends. They had all these guys. That's always been the case. So I think Brock Bowers, for me, for Jim Harbaugh, for Justin Herbert, with Everett being a free agent, makes a lot of sense.
You know, Mel, this is the case for all 32 teams in the NFL, but March is really going to educate us on what the Chargers will do come April for this very specific reason. Mike Williams and Keenan Allen currently are under contract for 2024. They have a combined cap charge of around $67 million. Each of them are at least $32 million. What that tells you, Mel, is that if they don't either get an extension done or take a pay cut, they're probably not sticking around on the current parameters of their deal. And I'm not sure how motivated either of them would be to take a pay cut. So if there's a scenario in which both remain beyond, for at least this season and beyond because of a modified deal, then I don't think wide receiver is as much of a need as you would agree with. But if both or one of them are gone, all of a sudden that wide receiver pick becomes that much more intriguing. So the other thing I think is important to mention is that when you have a new head coach and a new general manager, other than the guys, Mel, who are blue chip, no doubt about it, right? In this roster, guys like, for example, Justin Herbert and Rashawn Slater, just to name a couple on offense. If you are not a no doubt about it player, your roster spot is not a guarantee going forward. Sir, Quentin Johnston's going to be around, but this new regime may say, hey, you know what? He's a fine player, but this is not the kind of guy that's going to prevent us from taking another wide receiver early in the draft. So a couple of the names beyond the aforementioned Brock Bowers include Malik Nabers and Rome Odunze, 2 of the wide receivers in this year's class. It might be wide receiver 1 in other years, right, Mel? And you and I have differed just ever so slightly on the order of those 2 players, but I would say this. If you told me the Chargers woke up on April 26th, which is day 2 of the NFL draft, with Malik Nabers or Rome Odunze as their new wide receiver 1, my answer would be job well done by them.
No doubt about it. Rome Odunze, I've always given the slight edge to in terms of my ratings board. Mock drafts are going to be kind of all over the place because you're splitting hairs with these 2 receivers. But Odunze, Nabers, when you have Quentin Johnston, as you said, what's going to happen with the 2 veterans? But I think tight end with Bowers, who can do everything. He can block. He can run after the catch. He's got great hands. Odunze as well, the consistency. And I think Bowers and Odunze have the one thing in common. They've done it over the long haul. Odunze this year was special. Every game, field, nobody could contain him. Nobody. I think about the national championship game. He was open. Michael Penix Jr. didn't bring his A game, right? He was off target with some of those throws. So, for me, wide receiver is tempting. How about offensive tackle as well with Joe Alt sitting there? Lane Johnson, left tackle, moved to right tackle. Obviously, Slater's the guy, but you have Alt there available, possibly to help out Justin Herbert. If you don't want to go tight end with Bowers and you feel like Quentin Johnson is going to emerge, right, in year 2, then you could go with Joe Alt and put him over at right tackle. That all is helping your young quarterback get better. Now, obviously, Jim Harbaugh has been a quarterback whisperer wherever he's been. He had a quarterback, Tavita Pritchard is a 42-point underdog. Right, Stanford beat USC.
Wow.
Okay, so he's done it wherever he's been. University of San Diego with Josh Johnson. This is long before Andrew Luck was at Stanford, right? And he had J.J. McCarthy. He had Colin Kaepernick in San Francisco. Bottom line is Jim Harbaugh, he gets quarterbacks to maximize their ability and play their best football. So for Justin Herbert, we know what's going to happen. Getting one of the players on the board that we talked about field, whether it's the tight end, the receiver, whether it's the tackle, is going to make that happen.
Just to put a pin in the thought on the idea of taking a right tackle, in this case Joe Alt from Notre Dame, who we both believe has the goods to transition from left tackle to right tackle. Heck, he just transitioned from tight end, at least on a part-time basis, back in 2021 to a full-time left tackle. He's been unbelievable over the past 2 seasons for Notre Dame. I think Trey Pipkins, their current right tackle, is a good example of what I was referring to, is that Pipkins is a fine player. He was re-signed to a 3-year deal last year worth around $7.5, $8 million per year, Mel. He's a fine, solid starter. If they go back to Trey Pipkins as their starter in 2024, I'm not going to say that that is some major weakness on the roster, but Pipkins also isn't at the level, in my estimation, where if you, the Chargers, feel as though the best player on your board at pick number 5 is an offensive tackle, you can't take him because you feel like you already have the guy. So whether it's a pass catcher or a pass protector, I do think the Chargers board lines up nicely. It just has quite a bit of optionality, and in some ways, you and I feel as though the draft kind of gets started here at pick number 5, with the prevailing thought continuing to be that the first 4 selections could be 3 quarterbacks and then Marvin Harrison Jr.